3 months had passed since the arena, and Yuna had returned to her job in the cargo bay because she did not know what else to do with herself. The galaxy had offered her everything, wealth and fame and power beyond anything a cargo handler from. A destroyed colony could have imagined military organizations wanted her to train their soldiers. Corporations wanted her to be the face of their security divisions. Governments wanted her to serve as a diplomatic symbol of human potential. She had refused them all. The cargo bay was quiet in the early morning hours before the main shifts began, and Yuna found peace in the simple work of moving crates and checking manifests. It was honest labor that did not require her to be anything other than what she was. Commissioner Drell found her there with a concerned expression on his insectoid face. "You have a visitor," he said. "Another journalist." "No," Drell replied. "Kath Voren wants to speak with you." Yuna stopped what she was doing and looked at the commissioner. "He is here. He arrived on a medical transport an hour ago, and he specifically requested an audience with you, and I told him you would probably refuse, but he said he would wait as long as necessary." Yuna considered this for a long moment. The Apex Warlord, who had tried to kill her, now wanted to talk. Every instinct told her to refuse. Every logical part of her brain said that meeting with him was dangerous and foolish. But curiosity won. "Where is he?" Kath Voren had been placed in a private room in the station's diplomatic quarter, and when Yuna entered, she found him sitting in a specialized chair designed to support his paralyzed lower body. He looked smaller than she remembered. Not physically, because he was still massive compared to her, but something in his bearing had changed. The arrogant predator who had strutted through the station 3 months ago was gone. In his place was something she did not quite recognize. "You came," he said. "I was not certain you would." "Neither was I," Yuna replied. "What do you want?" "I want to understand." Yuna waited for him to continue. "In 200 years of combat, I have never been defeated." Kath Voren said, "I have killed warriors from a dozen species and conquered worlds and commanded fleets, and I believed I was invincible because nothing had ever proven otherwise." He shifted in his chair and winced as damaged nerves protested. "Then you broke me," he continued. "A small human girl who weighed less than one of my arms broke my spine and left me crippled, and I have spent 3 months trying to understand how that was possible." "I was trained," Yuna said. "My grandmother taught me how to fight." "No," Kath Voren replied. "Other species have training, and I have defeated them all easily because training cannot overcome superior strength and speed and natural weapons." He looked at her with something in his eyes that might have been respect. "You did not defeat me with training," he said. "You defeated me because you refused to fall when you should have fallen, and you refused to stop when you should have stopped, and you refused to die when you should have died. That is what humans do." "Yes," the Warlord agreed. "And that is what I cannot understand." He leaned forward as much as his ruined body would allow. "I had you," he said. "I know I had you because my claws cut your arm and my strikes broke your ribs, and any Apex warrior would have collapsed from that damage, but you kept fighting. Pain is just information. That is what the scientists say about your species now." Kath Voren replied. "They say Earth made you into something that processes pain differently than other creatures and keeps functioning through injuries that would incapacitate us." He paused. "But that is not what haunts me, human." "Then what does?" "You let me live." The words hung in the air between them. "Under Apex law, you had the right to kill me." Kath Voren continued. "I was broken and helpless, and you could have ended my life, and no one would have blamed you for it, but instead you walked away. Killing you would have made me a murderer." Yuna said, "Sparing you made me human." "I do not understand." "I know." They sat in silence for a moment, and Yuna saw something shift in the old warrior's face. "My people believe that mercy is weakness," he said. "We believe that leaving an enemy alive is the greatest insult because it says they are not worth the effort of killing. And now I am not certain what I believe, Kethvorn admitted. I have spent 3 months thinking about you and your mercy, and I cannot decide if you spared me because you thought I was beneath killing, or because you genuinely did not want to take a life. Does it matter? It matters to me. Yuna looked at the crippled warlord and saw him not a monster, but a being struggling to understand something his entire culture had told him was impossible. I spared you because killing was not necessary, she said finally. You were defeated, and you were no longer a threat, and ending your life would not have protected anyone or served any purpose except to prove that I could. That is not how warriors think. I am not a warrior, Yuna replied. I am a cargo handler who knows how to fight, and those are not the same thing. Kethvorn considered this for a long time. Perhaps that is why you won, he said finally. You were not trying to prove anything or earn glory or establish dominance, and you were just trying to survive and protect others. Perhaps the Dominion is falling apart. Kethvorn said, Civil war is coming, and everything we built will be destroyed, and I cannot decide if that is justice or tragedy. Maybe it is both. He looked at her with something that might have been understanding. You are a strange species. Human. We get that a lot. For the first time since she had met him, Kethvorn made a sound that might have been laughter. I will not trouble you again, he said. I only wanted to see the creature that destroyed my empire and try to understand what you are. Did you find your answer? No, he admitted, but I think I found a better question. Yuna left him there and returned to the cargo bay, where she belonged. The galaxy continued to change around her in ways both large and small. A new Apex delegation arrived at Varantos a week later with younger warriors who had heard stories about the human girl but did not quite believe them. One of them saw Yuna working in the cargo bay and laughed at his companions. This is the human who broke Kethvorn, he said mockingly. Impossible, and I do not believe it. An older Apex veteran who had been in the arena that day grabbed the young warrior by the arm and pulled him close. Walk away now, he growled. Why should I fear that tiny creature? Because I watched her fight through injuries that would have killed you, and I watched her break the greatest warrior our species has ever produced, and I watched her walk away from his body when she could have claimed his life. The veteran forced the young warrior to look at Yuna, who continued working without acknowledging their presence. Look at her eyes, the veteran said. Really look and tell me what you see. The young warrior looked, and something in those calm, patient eyes made his predator instincts scream warnings that his conscious mind could not understand. He walked away quickly with his companions following. The veteran lingered for a moment, and when Yuna finally glanced in his direction, he bowed his head slightly in respect before departing. Yuna smiled slightly and returned to her work. She had never wanted to be feared. She had never wanted to be a symbol or a legend or a turning point in galactic history. But if fear kept the peace and prevented the next group of children from being threatened, then she could carry that weight. Earth had taught her how to carry impossible weights. It had spent millions of years forging her ancestors into something that could endure anything, and she was the daughter of that long struggle. A human, nothing more, nothing less, and that was enough. The surgical bay was bright and cold, and Yuna drifted in and out of consciousness as the medical team worked to save her life. 3 broken ribs had punctured tissue inside her chest, and internal bleeding had filled her abdominal cavity, and her left wrist was fractured in 2 places. The Volani surgeon who operated on her later said that she should not have been able to stand after the first rib broke, let alone continue fighting for another 4 minutes. Human pain tolerance is remarkable, the surgeon told his colleagues. She was dying, and she did not stop. Yuna survived the surgery, but remained unconscious for 2 days while her body began the slow process of healing. During those 2 days, the galaxy changed. The broadcast of The arena fight had been seen by billions across 3 sectors, and the image of the small human girl breaking the apex warlord burned itself into the collective memory of 100 species. Dr. Velith released her xenobiology scans to the Galactic Scientific Network, and for the first time the wider galaxy understood what humans actually were: Deathworld survivors, persistence predators, creatures forged by a planet that had tried to kill them for millions of years and failed the Apex Dominion. Went into immediate crisis as news of Kethvoris' defeat spread to their conquered territories. For 2 centuries, their empire had been built on the myth of Apex invincibility, and now that myth was shattered, 3 star systems declared independence. Within the first week, 2 more announced they were considering secession. The Dominion Council met in emergency session, and half of them wanted to blame Kethvorn for the humiliation, while the other half wanted to send a fleet to destroy Varanthos, stationing everyone on it. They did neither because the galaxy was watching, and any action they took would only prove that the Apex were afraid. Humans across the sector received the news in their own ways, on mining stations and cargo ships, and small colonies scattered throughout known space humans stood a little straighter and spoke a little louder. They had been overlooked and dismissed and laughed at since first contact, and now they had something that every other species had to acknowledge. One of their own had done the impossible. Una woke on the 3rd day to find Commissioner Drell standing beside her bed with his mandibles twitching nervously. "You are awake," he said. "Good, because we have a situation." "What situation?" "There are approximately 200 journalists waiting outside this medical bay who want to interview the human who killed the Apex Warlord." "I did not kill him," Una said. "No, you did something worse," Drell replied. "You broke him, and then you let him live, and the Apex do not know how to process that." He paused. "Also, there are 47 humans currently blocking the corridor outside your room, and they refuse to leave." "Why?" "Because an Apex assassin attempted to reach you last night." Una sat up despite the pain in her ribs. "What happened?" "The assassin arrived at approximately 3 in the morning," Drell explained. "He found 47 humans standing outside your door, and they were cargo workers and engineers and merchants with no military training, but they would not move." "Did he attack them?" "No," the commissioner said. He looked at them for a long moment, and then he turned around and left, and when our security team interviewed him later, he said something strange." "What did he say?" Drell's compound eyes reflected something that might have been admiration. "He said that killing you would bring millions more humans to avenge you, and the Dominion was not prepared to fight a war against a species that did not know how to give up." Una leaned back against her pillow and closed her eyes. "I just wanted to protect those children," she said quietly. "I did not want any of this. Unfortunately, what you want no longer matters." Drell replied. "You are a symbol now, whether you like it or not, and symbols have power that the people they represent cannot control. Over the following weeks, the political situation continued to evolve in ways that no one had predicted. The Apex Dominion fractured as internal factions blamed each other for the humiliation, and civil war began brewing among their conquered systems. The Galactic Council formally recognized humanity as a protected developing species, which was a diplomatic category that had never been used before. The designation did not mean humans needed protection. It meant the Council was afraid of what humanity might become without guidance and oversight. Scientists from dozens of worlds requested access to human medical records and physiological data, and the resulting papers transformed xenobiology overnight. Humans were not the soft prey animals the galaxy had assumed. They were persistence predators from a death world who had evolved to endure damage and recover from injuries and keep fighting long after any reasonable creature would have stopped. The Volani children that Una had protected came to visit her in the medical bay, and they brought flowers from their homeworld and thanked her in their soft chirping language. Their parents stood behind them with tears in their eyes. "We will never forget what you did." The mother said, "Our people will never forget." Yuna did not know what to say, so she simply smiled and accepted the flowers. When she was finally released from the medical bay, she found a crowd waiting for her outside, humans and aliens mixed together, and they cheered when she appeared and reached out to touch her as if she was something holy. She was not comfortable with the attention, but she endured it because she understood that these people needed something to believe in that night. She sat alone in her small quarters and looked at the messages that had poured in from across the galaxy. Offers of wealth and position and power from corporations and governments and military organizations who wanted to claim her as their own. She deleted them all. A soft chime indicated someone was at her door, and when she opened it, she found a group of human cargo workers standing in the corridor. They were the ones who had guarded her room during the assassination attempt. "We wanted to check on you," their leader said. "Make sure you were settling in, okay?" "I am fine," Yuna replied. "Thank you for what you did." The man shrugged. "You are one of us," he said simply. "We protect our own." He paused. "Besides, we heard what you did for those alien kids, and that is what humans do, right? We stand up for people who cannot stand up for themselves, even when it costs us everything." Yuna looked at the faces of her fellow humans and saw something there that she had not seen since her colony was destroyed. She saw family. "Would you like to come in?" she asked. "I think I have enough tea for everyone." They stayed for hours talking and laughing and sharing stories of their lives among the stars. And for the first time in 3 years, Yuna Park did not feel alone. The Grand Arena of Varanthos had been built to hold 50,000 spectators, but today 80,000 beings had crammed themselves into every available space. They hung from railings and stood in aisles and pressed against barriers because word had spread across 3 sectors that a human girl was going to fight the apex warlord, and no one wanted to miss the spectacle. The arena floor was circular and covered in sand that had been heated to match apex preferences, and the gravity had been increased slightly to give the home advantage to the Dominion's champion. Broadcast drones hovered everywhere, capturing every angle for the billions. Watching across the galaxy, Kethvorin entered first, and the apex soldiers in the crowd roared their approval as their warlord strode across the sand with his 4 arms raised in triumph. He wore ceremonial armor that left his joints exposed for mobility, as black and red scales gleamed under the arena lights. 200 years of victories had made him legend, and today he would add another kill to his record. The crowd fell silent when Yuna walked through the opposite gate. She was barefoot and wearing simple training clothes, and she looked impossibly small against the massive arena and the monster waiting for her. Some spectators laughed nervously. Others looked away because they did not want to watch an execution. The Morvathi scientist Dr. Velith sat in the press section with her colleagues, and she had shared her scans with every xenobiologist on the station, and now they all watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. "She cannot win," a Torvani researcher whispered. "Perhaps not," Dr. Velith replied. "But I do not think she expects to win." "Then why is she fighting?" "Because she's human, and humans do not surrender even when they should." Kethvorin walked to the center of the arena and waited for Yuna to approach. She stopped 10 feet away from him and looked up at his towering form without any expression on her face. "You came," he said with amusement coloring his voice. "I thought perhaps you would run in the night like the coward your species is." Yuna said nothing. "I will offer you one final mercy, human." Kethvorin continued. "Kneel before me and beg for forgiveness, and I will make your death quick and painless." Yuna said nothing. The warlord's amusement faded slightly. "Do you not understand what is about to happen to you, little creature?" he growled. "I have killed 47 challengers in this arena, and not one of them lasted longer than a minute against me." Yuna said nothing. She simply waited. The arena horn sounded and Kethvorin attacked, He was fast beyond anything his size should have been capable of, and he crossed the distance between them in a heartbeat with his claws aimed at Yuna's head. She was not there. Her body shifted 2 inches to the left, and his claws cut through empty air, and before he could recover, she had moved again, sliding around his flank like water flowing around a stone. He spun and struck again with his lower arms reaching for her torso. She ducked under the grab and stepped back just far enough to avoid his follow-up kick. The crowd murmured in confusion. No one dodged an apex warlord. No one moved that smoothly against a predator who had 200 years of killing experience. Kethvorn pressed his attack with combinations that had ended dozens of fights before, but every strike found nothing but air, and every grab closed on emptiness. Yuna was not faster than him. She was reading him, her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind as she watched his shoulders and his hips and his weight distribution, and she knew where each attack was going before it arrived. The body always tells you what comes next. 3 minutes passed and Kethvorn had not landed a single clean hit. The crowd was no longer laughing. The apex soldiers watched in growing disbelief as their invincible champion chased a human girl around the arena without catching her. Stand still and fight. Kethvorn roared. Yuna said nothing. She kept moving with small efficient steps that conserved her energy while he burned through his reserves with massive explosive attacks. 5 minutes passed. Kethvorn was breathing harder now and sweat glistened on his scales, and his movements were losing their precision. Apex warriors were ambush predators built for short, violent encounters, not extended battles. Their bodies generated enormous power, but they could not sustain it. Humans were different. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters who chased prey across vast distances until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. Humans could run for hours and fight for hours and keep going long after any sensible creature would have stopped. 7 minutes passed and Kethvorn was struggling. His attacks were slower now and wilder, and fueled by rage rather than skill. Yuna had taken damage during the fight because even her reflexes could not avoid everything. A cut on her arm was bleeding steadily, and bruises were forming across her ribs where glancing blows had connected. But she did not slow down. The pain was just information to be processed and set aside. Her body had been trained since childhood to keep functioning through damage that would have crippled other species. She stepped inside his guard and spoke for the first time. Since the fight began, "You are tired." Her voice was quiet, but the arena microphones carried it to every speaker in the stadium, and suddenly 80,000 beings were holding their breath. Kethvorn stared at her with something new in his eyes, something that looked almost like fear. Impossible. He gasped. "No," Yuna replied. "Just human." He screamed and charged with everything he had left, throwing his massive body at her in a desperate final assault. Yuna did not retreat. She stepped forward into his charge, and her hands found his lower right arm, and she pivoted her entire body using his momentum against him as her grandmother had taught her when she was 6 years old. The joint lock was simple and brutal. She rotated his arm past its natural range of motion and used the leverage to twist his spine, and her legs drove into the sand as she pulled with every ounce of strength her Deathworld muscles could generate. The sound of Kethvorn's spine breaking echoed through the arena like a gunshot. He collapsed face first into the sand with his body bent at an angle that bodies were not supposed to bend. His legs did not move. His lower arms did not move. Only his upper arms twitched weakly as he tried to understand what had happened. The arena fell silent, completely silent. 80,000 beings from dozens of species sat in absolute stillness as their minds tried to process what they had just witnessed. The invincible warlord of the Apex Dominion lay broken on the sand. A human girl stood over him, breathing hard, with blood dripping from her wounds. 13 seconds passed in that terrible silence. 13 seconds that stretched into eternity. 13 seconds that changed everything. Yuna looked down at Kethvarn, and under Apex law, she had the right to finish him and claim his life as her prize. She turned and walked away. The silence shattered into chaos as the crowd erupted with screaming and shouting, and the Apex soldiers reached for their weapons before their officers stopped them because their own laws bound them, and killing her now would shame the Dominion forever. Yuna made it through the arena gate before her legs gave out. The damage she had absorbed finally caught up with her as adrenaline faded, and she collapsed against the wall with blood pooling beneath her. Medical teams rushed to her side and lifted her onto a stretcher and carried her toward the surgical bay. As they ran through the corridors, she heard the crowd still roaring behind her, and she smiled slightly. Before darkness took her, she had done what she needed to do. The rest was up to the galaxy. The holding cell was small and cold, but Yuna had slept in worse places. She sat on the metal bench with her back against the wall and her eyes closed, and her mind drifting to memories she usually kept locked away. Visitors came throughout the night, because apparently a human who had challenged the Apex Warlord was something worth seeing before she died. A Tovani merchant pressed his face against the transparent barrier and studied her like she was an exhibit in a museum. "So small," he muttered. "How did something so small break a warrior's arm?" Yuna did not answer. A group of Chilaxian traders came next, and they whispered among themselves in their clicking language and took images with their devices and left without speaking. To her directly, she did not mind the silence. Silence was an old friend. When she was 7 years old, her grandmother had begun teaching her the movements that their family had passed down for generations. Not sport fighting or competition forms, but the hard practical techniques that Korean farmers and villagers had developed to survive invasions and occupations and all the violence that history had thrown at them. Our ancestors did not have swords or armor. Her grandmother had told her they had their hands and their minds and their refusal to die, and that was enough. Yuna remembered practicing in the garden behind their home on the colony world, where she had grown up. She remembered her grandmother correcting her stance and adjusting her grip and explaining that true strength was not about size or muscle, but about understanding how bodies moved and where they were weak. Every creature has joints, the old woman had said. Every creature has pressure points and balance and limits, and if you understand these things, then size does not matter. Yuna had not understood then. She was beginning to understand now. The memory shifted, and she was 11 years old and sitting in an escape pod that tumbled through the darkness between stars. The colony ship had been attacked by raiders who wanted its cargo and did not care about its passengers. Yuna had made it to an escape pod, but the pod's navigation system was damaged, and its distress beacon was weak, and rescue was not coming. Day 1, she had rationed the emergency supplies and tried not to panic. Day 3, the food ran out. Day 5, she started doing exercises to keep her blood moving because the pod's heating system was failing and her body temperature was dropping. Day 7, she began hallucinating from dehydration and hunger, but she kept moving because her grandmother's voice in her head told her that stopping meant dying. Day 11, a salvage ship picked up her faint signal and found a small Korean girl doing push-ups in a freezing pod with cracked lips and sunken eyes, who looked at them and asked if they had any water. The salvage crew had called her lucky. Yuna knew luck had nothing to do with it. A new visitor pulled her from her memories, and this one was different from the others. The Marvati scientist had silver skin and large dark eyes, and she carried a scanning device that hummed softly as she approached the cell. "I am Dr. Velith," she said. "I am a xenobiologist studying the physical characteristics of different species, and I was wondering if you would permit me to scan you." Yuna shrugged. Why not? Dr. Velith activated her device and moved it slowly around Yuna's body. And as the data appeared on her screen, her expression changed from curiosity to confusion to something that looked almost like fear. This cannot be correct. She whispered. What? The scientist looked at Yuna with new eyes. Your bone density is nearly 3 times the galactic average, she said. Your muscle fibers are configured for sustained output rather than burst activity and your pain threshold. Readings are beyond anything in my database. Is that bad? It is remarkable. Dr. Veleth said. Where exactly did your species evolve? Earth. The scientist pulled up information on her device and read it silently, and her silver skin grew pale. Your planet has a gravity rating of 1.0 on the standard scale, which is considered high. She said, your atmosphere contains a gas called oxygen that is corrosive to most organic matter, and your world experiences constant seismic activity and extreme weather patterns and is filled with predators and parasites and toxic plants. She looked up from her device. Earth is classified as a Category 4 death world. She continued, only 12% of known planets with life are rated Category 4 or higher in intelligent species. Almost never evolve on such worlds because the conditions are too hostile. We managed, Yuna said. You more than managed. Dr. Veleth replied. Your species was forged by a planet that tried to kill you every single day for millions of years, and instead of dying, you adapted and overcame and spread across your world, and now you're spreading across the galaxy. She put down her device. The apex evolved on a Category 2 world with low gravity and mild climate. She said, they became apex predators, not because their environment was harsh, but because it was easy, and they were the biggest and strongest creatures on their planet, so nothing challenged them. What does that mean for tomorrow? Dr. Veleth hesitated. Kethvorin is a trained warrior with 200 years of combat experience, and he outweighs you by 600 kilograms, and his claws can cut through ship hull plating. So I will lose. I did not say that. The scientist replied. Apex warriors are built for explosive power and short engagements because that is how predators hunt on easy worlds, but you are built for endurance and persistence and recovery, because that is how prey survives on death worlds. She leaned closer to the barrier. The apex are ambush predators. She said, they strike fast and hard and expect their target to fall, but if the target does not fall, then they do not know what to do, because nothing on their world ever survived the first strike. Yuna thought about this for a long moment. You are saying I need to survive the first strike. I am saying you need to survive all of his strikes until he has nothing left to give. Dr. Veleth replied, and then you need to still be standing. She gathered her equipment and turned to leave, but stopped at the door. I'm going to share my scans with the other scientists on this station, she said. The galaxy should know what Earth creates before tomorrow's challenge. Will it matter? Perhaps not to the outcome, Dr. Veleth admitted, but it will matter to how the galaxy remembers what happens in that arena. She left, and Yuna was alone again with her thoughts and her memories and the knowledge that tomorrow she would face a monster who had never been defeated. A message arrived on the cell's display screen with the seal of the Apex Dominion, and when Yuna opened it, she found 47 video recordings, 47 previous challengers who had faced Kethvorin in ritual combat, 47 deaths. She watched every single one with careful attention, noting how the Warlord moved and attacked and finished his opponents. He was fast and brutal and overwhelming, but he was also predictable. He always opened with the same rushing charge. He always targeted the head or chest with his first strike. He always expected his enemy to be broken after the initial assault. And when they were not broken, he grew frustrated and his attacks became wild and unfocused. Yuna watched the recordings 3 times and then she lay down on the metal bench and closed her eyes. Her grandmother's voice whispered in her memory, "Do not watch the weapon." The old woman said, "Watch the body because the body always tells you what comes next." Yuna smiled slightly and let sleep take her. Tomorrow would be the hardest day of her life, but she had survived 11 days alone in the void between stars. She had been forged by a Deathworld that had tried to kill her ancestors for millions of years, and she was not afraid of one overgrown lizard who had never faced anything that refused to die. The cargo crates were heavy, but Unipark did not complain as she lifted them onto the transport platform at Varanthos Station. She was small for a human and quiet in ways that made other species forget. She was there at all 3 years she had worked these docks, and 3 years she had kept her head down and her mouth shut, because that was how you survived when you were alone in a galaxy that did not care about you. The station hummed with activity as thousands of beings from dozens of worlds moved through its corridors, conducting business and trade and all the complicated things that kept civilizations running. Yuna wiped sweat from her forehead and reached for another crate when the alarms began to sound, not emergency alarms, but announcement alarms that meant someone important was arriving. She looked up at the massive display screens that flickered to life across the cargo bay, and her stomach turned cold. The Apex Dominion had come to Varanthos. Every worker in the bay stopped moving as the broadcast showed massive warships emerging from faster-than-light travel just outside the station. The Apex were conquerors who had crushed 43 star systems under their clawed feet, and they answered to no one. Their warriors stood 12 feet tall, with scales like armor and 4 arms that could tear through metal, and they had never lost a war because they had never faced an enemy they could not break. Commissioner Drell appeared on the screens with his insectoid features twitching nervously as he welcomed the Apex delegation and assured all station residents that there was nothing to fear. Yuna knew that was a lie. Everyone knew that was a lie. The Apex did not visit places without taking something, and today Varanthos would learn what price they demanded within hours. The main concourse had been transformed into a celebration hall where the Apex warriors strutted and drank and laughed at the smaller species who scrambled to serve them. Yuna tried to avoid the area, but her route home passed through the merchant quarter which bordered the concourse. She moved quickly with her eyes down, hoping to slip through unnoticed. That was when she saw him. Warlord Kethvorin stood in the center of the concourse, surrounded by his officers, and he was the largest Apex she had ever seen. His scales were black and red, and old scars crossed his face like medals of honor. When he spoke, his voice carried across the entire hall without effort. "We come to offer you entertainment," he announced with a grin that showed rows of serrated teeth. "The Apex Dominion challenges any species to send a champion to face us in ritual combat and prove their worth." No one moved. No one spoke. Everyone knew what these challenges meant, because the Apex had done this on 100 stations, and the result was always the same. Whatever poor soul stepped into that arena would die badly and publicly, and the Apex would laugh and drink and remind the galaxy who held the power. Kethvorin's eyes swept the crowd and landed on a small group of humans near the merchant stalls. His laughter boomed through the hall. "What about you soft little creatures?" he called out. "Will humanity send a champion, or are you too busy being prey animals to fight?" The humans said nothing because what could they say? Humanity was new to the galactic stage and had no military worth mentioning and no reputation, except as survivors who somehow kept showing up in places they did not belong. Kethvorin dismissed them with a wave of his 4 hands and returned to his drinking. Yuna exhaled slowly and continued moving toward the merchant quarter. She was almost through when the screaming started. An Apex warrior had wandered away from the celebration and found his way to a food stall where a Morvathi merchant was selling fruit. The warrior was drunk and angry about something, and he had decided that the merchant had insulted him by not bowing low enough. Now the merchant was on the ground with purple blood leaking from his head, and the warrior was reaching for a group of children who had been buying sweets at a nearby stand. The children were Vellani, and their soft gray fur was standing straight up in terror as they pressed against the wall with nowhere to run. The warrior grabbed one by the arm and lifted it off the ground. Perhaps I will take tribute myself." He snarled. Yuna did not think. She did not plan. She simply moved. One moment she was 20 feet away, and the next she was between the warrior and the children, with her hand on his wrist. "Let go," she said quietly. The warrior stared down at her with confusion that slowly turned to rage. "You dare touch me, human! Let go of the child." He dropped the Vellani youngling and swung his massive fist at Yuna's head with enough force to shatter concrete. She was not there when it landed. Her body shifted and her hands moved, and there was a sound like wood breaking, and the warrior screamed as his arm bent in a direction arms were not supposed to bend. He collapsed to his knees with agony, twisting his reptilian features, and Yuna stepped back with her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The merchant quarter had gone silent. Every eye was on her. Every camera drone that had been broadcasting the celebration was now pointed at the small human girl who had just broken an apex warrior. Kethvarin pushed through the crowd with his officers behind him, and when he saw his soldier writhing on the ground, he did not look angry. He looked amused. "What is this?" he asked softly. "She attacked me," the wounded warrior gasped. "The human attacked me without provocation." Kethvarin looked at Yuna and then at the Vellani children still huddled against the wall, and then at the bleeding merchant on the ground. "Without provocation," he repeated. "Yes, I am certain that is exactly what happened." He stepped closer to Yuna until his shadow covered her completely. "Under Apex law, any assault against the Dominion soldier is punishable by death," he said. "But I am feeling generous today, so I will give you a choice, human girl." Yuna said nothing. "You may kneel and beg for mercy, and I will make your death quick and painless." Kethvarin continued. "Or you may face me in the arena tomorrow, and I will make your death slow and educational for anyone else who thinks they can raise a hand against the Apex." The crowd held its breath. Yuna looked up at the massive warlord who had conquered worlds and killed thousands and never lost a single combat challenge in 200 years of warfare arena. She said. Kethvarin's grin widened. "I was hoping you would say that." He turned and walked away with his officers following, and the crowd parted before him like water before a ship. Commissioner Drell found Yuna an hour later in a holding cell, where station security had placed her for her own protection. "You have to run," he said, with his mandibles clicking nervously. "I can get you a ship and fake identification, and you can disappear into the outer colonies where the Apex will never find you." Yuna shook her head. "Those children would have died if I did nothing, and now you will die instead." Drell said. "Kethvarin has killed 47 challengers in that arena, and not one of them lasted more than a minute against him, and you are half his size with none of his training." "I know. Then why will you not run?" Yuna looked at the commissioner with eyes that held something he could not quite understand. "Because running would mean what I did was wrong," she said. "And protecting those children was not wrong, so I will not run from the consequences." Drell stared at her for a long moment, and then turned and left without another word. He did not understand humans. He was beginning to suspect no one in the galaxy did, and tomorrow the arena would teach them all something new about the strange soft creatures from the planet called Earth.